And you're live. Have fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Homebrew Studio. This is our very first inaugural premiere stream. I just said three things that mean the exact same thing, but that's fine. Welcome to the studio. My name is Matthew A. Siebert, and I am going to be your host. I use he, him pronouns, just so you know, and as we dive into this land of unbridled creativity and imagination, I will be your guide in this, the Homebrew Studio. Now, normally we're going to have Logan with us as our stream producer. Tonight we have, at least for the beginning of the stream, Angela with us. Angela, if you want to say hi to the people in chat, just so they know you're there, and I'm not talking to myself. But normally Logan will be with us running all the behind-the-scenes stuff as I am just here on camera yammering away and hopefully showing you all a good time as we do some homebrew creativity fun. We're going to be streaming for about an hour today. We might wrap up a little bit early depending on how quickly we get through our topics, and if we just run out of things to discuss, I'll cut it off. But hang out with us in the meantime, and it should be a lot of fun. So, as I said, we are a brand new show, part of the NerdSmith network. We're going to be streaming every Wednesday at 5 p.m. on Pacific time, right here on twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith. We thank you for joining us. In the chat, I can see Duskfey Druid. I can see Jay. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Hopefully you have some fun with us while we're here. And if you haven't already followed the Twitch channel, there's a little button up here. It's somewhere in that region of the Twitch layout. It's a little heart-shaped button. Just click that. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get notified anytime that we are streaming on this channel. If you want to support NerdSmith and help out our network, feel free to subscribe. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you can always use your Twitch Prime subscription, which is free for you every month. May not be a big deal for you, but for us, really helps us out because we are just sort of a network. We're just getting started, and every little bit helps. We appreciate your support. So, getting started tonight, let's talk about homebrew. Let's talk about what is homebrew and why it's important for our games. This is a series I really want to focus at the newer game master, the newer dungeon master, the newer storyteller, and maybe you've run some modules, maybe you're thinking about running your first game. How do you take that written tome, that book of adventure, and make it something that's unique to you and fun and surprising for your players? Well, homebrew is the answer to that. If we're asking what is homebrew, homebrew is anything you create for your tabletop role-playing game. It can be a creature, a spell, an item, a player class, or even a playable folk. A location, a big bad, a god, a pantheon, a cosmos in its entirety. Anything that doesn't come out of a published source book is homebrew. Anything you create for your own game, invent or adapt to fit, that's homebrew. And that's the kind of stuff we're going to be working on together, you and me, here in our studio. So, homebrew is an excellent opportunity, to inject personality and originality into your tabletop gaming experience. If you open up, for example, the Dungeons & Dragons player handbook and look through the spell list, you're going to see names like Melf, Leomund, Mordenkainen. Those were all player characters in Gary Gygax's very first D&D game, when they were just inventing all of this stuff, all of these magical spells and everything that would eventually become part of the D&D universe. If you're looking at modern D&D, the Forgotten Realms setting, that was actually a homebrew setting created by Ed Greenwood in 1978 that then became adopted into the official D&D canon. So homebrew has always been part of role-playing, and it's something that I want to help all of you who maybe don't know that much about homebrew, or never dipped your toe in the pool, get a little more comfortable and get a little more understanding of how you can start creating your own homebrew for your games. So, today's topic And every week we're going to discuss a different topic, a different aspect of homebrewing, of role-playing games, and looking at how we can inject our homebrew into our games. Today's topic is going to be low-level enemies, because I think that's a fantastic place, especially if you're a newer GM just starting out, just starting your own game, your own campaign. You've got these low-level adventurers. You're going to need creatures to put them up against. You're going to need people and monsters and all kinds of things to challenge them. So why not start there in terms of creating our homebrew? Now, when it comes to low-level enemies, the kind of things that you're going to put your first-level adventurers up against, I don't think there is anything more classic or more prototypical than the giant rat. If you're in Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, Fallout, it all starts with the giant rat. They are the classic RPG low-level enemy. So let's take a look at the giant rat as it exists as a stat block in the 5th edition Monster Manual. So it's a small beast, has a relatively, or sort of a middling armor class, very few hit points, and what I really love about the giant rat, besides the fact that it's a classic sort of RPG monster, is it's so simple. It has one attack, it has its bite attack, so you know what it's going to do every round and every turn that it has. It's going to try and bite something. And it has a few special abilities. It has dark vision, which means it's going to be very adept in the dark, and it's going to try and use that to its advantage. It has pack tactics, which means this is a creature that's going to try and attack in a group. There are no lone hero giant rats. Rats swarm. They try and overwhelm an enemy. So right away we're getting a lot of flavor, we're getting a lot of ideas of the kind of places and the kind of situations that you're going to find this enemy in. So, let's take this basic template we have here for a giant rat, and let's make it something a bit more unique. How can we change the giant rat in a way that's still going to evoke that sense of familiarity, that sense of new adventurers are basically glorified rat catchers, and allow us to put a spin on it? Well, oh, hi Finnick. Nice to see you showed up. Well, what if we make our giant rats robots? What if we, and this is a simple change, if you think about it, what if we change their creature type from beasts to construct? And suddenly we're not dealing with a little chittering thing that's crawling through sewers or living in darkened caves. Now we have something that maybe you'll find in the lair of a wizard or some other kind of arcane practitioner. They've created these little mechanical rats. So let's start getting into some changes here. Let's call this a mechanical giant rat. Oh, Quizmaster Chris, hello and welcome. Good to see you here. Hope the weather in Seattle is treating you well. What we're going to do is we're just going to change our creature type here from a beast to a construct. Now, we can't just stop there because there are some inherent differences between beasts and construct. Certain differences, certain strengths, certain weaknesses. So let's go down the list here of attributes that we have. Armor class, we're going to leave that pretty much the same. Same for hit points and speed. Neither of those are going to really be affected by this change. Their statistics, their ability scores, we're going to leave those the same as well because those don't really make a big difference. In terms of not wanting to alter the difficulty of our rats too much, we're going to leave those the same as are. They're still going to be very dexterous, not terribly strong or smart or charismatic, and about middling when it comes to wisdom and constitution. When it comes to our senses, dark vision, that's fine. You can imagine these robots are able to see in the dark. They have amplified visual sensors. No languages, challenge the same. But what we are going to add in here is some condition immunities. Now, this is important when we're changing from a beast to a construct, because if you think about constructs, robots, mechanical things, they can't fall prey to the same kind of effects that a beast can. So a construct, for example, can't be charmed. You can't influence the emotions of a construct. They don't have any. They also can't be frightened. You can't scare a robot. They also can't be poisoned because they have no bloodstream. Poison doesn't work on them. So already we're getting a few changes here just by changing the creature type from one to another. A few other things we're going to have to change here is condition, or excuse me, not condition immunities, but damage immunities. Because you cannot poison a giant rat, it does not take damage from poison-typed attacks. So it is just immune to poison. It does not work on our mechanical giant rat. Now, anytime we are going to be adding strengths or immunities, that kind of thing, to toughen an enemy, if we want to keep the challenge rating about the same, we need to counterbalance that by introducing some kind of weakness to offset it. So we've made these mechanical giant rats immune to poison, and they cannot be charmed or frightened. So we should introduce some kind of weakness that's going to counterbalance that strength. And what I'm thinking is, we're going to give them a damage vulnerability. And what that means in 5e is any type of damage of this type that they are vulnerable to, they take double damage. So while poison is no longer effective, we're going to say lightning is twice as effective. And I can't spell vulnerability, apparently. We're going to say lightning is twice as effective. These are very simple constructs. They are maybe powered by some kind of arcane lightning stone or something like that. A very simple electronic or electrical system. They can be overloaded and short-circuited quite easily. So we're introducing a weakness to counterbalance their strength, and the challenge rating kind of evens out. Yes, exactly. Duskfey Druid makes an excellent point. Should it be immune to psychic damage? You know what? I'll go ahead and add that. Because that's a very good point. Most robots don't have brains and thus are not affected by any kind of psychic attack. And so I think that's going to be about it for this section. Now let's move down to their abilities. Excuse me. I try and center this window as best as I can. Let's move down to their abilities. Now, I don't really think of constructs and robots as having a keen sense of smell. So we're going to take that out. That's another way we're going to balance this out a little bit. As those strengths that we've given it, now 2 kinds of damage immunity, let's take out the keen smell because it doesn't make sense thematically and it's also going to balance it out a bit better. We are going to leave the pack tactics, though, because that's something that still makes sense. If we have a bunch of little rat bots that are going to swarm up on you and bite you, then that still makes sense that this kind of pack tactic mentality is still going to be their primary mode of attack. So, as far as the bite attack itself, no reason to futz around with that. The damage is going to be about the same, whether it's a rat bot or an actual rat. So we've pretty much got here a finished homebrew item. Just like that, we've got a new mechanical giant rat that we could throw at a group of adventurers, and it's going to be something unique and interesting and flavorful that is different from just your standard giant rat in the monster manual. So, just like that, we've already got one done. But as cool as a mechanical giant rat is, could we go further with it? What's something interesting that we imagine a construct or a robot being capable of doing that a normal rat couldn't? How about we give it laser eyes? Yeah, let's give it laser eyes. So, if we're making this a mechanical giant rat with laser eyes. Ah, geez. Then we're going to change up its actions here. We're going to take away its bite attack. And its main source of damage is now going to be its laser eyes. It's going to shoot and zap our hapless adventurers with. So we're changing this from a melee to a ranged attack. We're going to leave the +4 to hit. And change reach to range. Now, we don't want this to be a massive, long-range kind of attack. These are challenge rating 1/8. They're as simple as you can get in terms of enemies. So let's just keep it a very short range. We'll do 20, 40 feet. So within 20 feet, they have advantage. Beyond that, up to 40 feet is disadvantage. And we'll say beyond 40 feet, they just can't hit you. So they have to be kind of close to zap you with their eye beams. And we're still going to do 1d4 plus 2 damage. We won't change the damage amount, but we will change the type to fire damage. We could make this radiant damage if we wanted to, because radiant is typically associated with lights and lasers or light beams. I'm going to go with fire just because radiant is very powerful in D&D 5e. There are very few items or spells or what have you that give you resistance to radiant damage as opposed to fire damage, which is much more common. So we're just going to leave it as fire damage. But let's go back through and see if there's anything else we need to change. Everything up here looks fine. Pack Tactics, though. Pack Tactics is an ability that you really want for a creature that's going to be doing melee attacks, because it needs adjacent allies to get that advantage. If we're changing these to be ranged creatures now, if we're changing these to be, yes, thank you, Chris. It is my lifelong goal to have a Bob Ross-esque moment, and now I've accomplished that. If we're going to change these to be ranged, though, we can't really have them have pack tactics. So what's something else we can come up with to replace those pack tactics? Well, if they have laser eyes, then I think it makes sense for them to have infrared heat vision. That makes sense, right? So we give them heat vision. What does that mean? Well, it means that, whoops, the rats can detect invisible heat sources. We'll say within 20 feet, because that's a fairly short distance. So these rats can detect invisible creatures that are within the short range of their laser eye beams. That's an interesting complication. If you're thinking about how we're going to put these into an adventure or a narrative, say we have adventurers who are trying to invade a wizard's tower, and maybe they think, oh, we can try using invisibility to sneak past all of the guards. Well, the wizard has thought of this, and the wizard has these mechanical rats with their heat vision eyes that can detect invisible creatures. So now we have second variation on the giant rat, the mechanical giant rat with laser eyes. This is fun, and it's not difficult if you kind of have a sense for it, and hopefully you're starting to get that kind of sense where you can be a little sort of freewheeling with things and take things out and add things in, and really the only limit is your imagination. So, I would love if somebody did a thing of me with a Bob Ross afro painting a happy little mecha rat with laser eyes. That would be amazing, Logan. So we have our giant rats, and we're also almost halfway through our runtime. Oh my goodness. We started a little late though, so that's fine. But let's move on to another kind of low-level enemy. let's put aside the giant rat and the mechanical giant rat, and let's think of something else that's very commonplace for low-level adventurers. Let's talk about undead. Now, undead, it seems to me, have gotten really popular recently in tabletop RPGs. You see them invading pop culture in games like Skyrim, they're in The Walking Dead and various vampire romance properties, but let's take a look at since this is our first time in the studio, let's take a look at the most simple, basic kind of undead. No, I do not want to install Windows features, remind me later. Most basic kind of undead you really come across, and that is your good old skeleton. I love skeletons. Skeletons are fun. I may have played a skeleton in a long-running campaign. So maybe I'm biased. But if you will look at the stat block over here for the stock standard skeleton from our monster manual, excuse me, they're pretty plain. They don't have a lot of special abilities aside from dark vision again. But they do have some vulnerabilities and immunities, being undead, having that creature type that does grant certain benefits. And they have 2 attack options, as opposed to the giant rat, which only had the 1. They have a melee option and a ranged option. So we're starting to see that this is going to be an enemy that has more advanced combat tactics, where up front you're going to have the melee line that are going to hinder opponents' movements, and in the back you're going to have archers that are going to be shooting you from the distance. So, when dealing with undead, and I think this is important, you have to keep in mind that this is a creature that was once alive, most of the time anyway. This is a creature that was once alive. And you have to think, given what we see now, what clues do we have about who this skeleton was in life? What clues do we have about how he or she or they died? This skeleton is wearing armor. It's old and corroded, but it's basic armor. They have simple weaponry. This suggests that this skeleton was an adventurer, or a guard, or a militia member, maybe. They lived a life wherein combat was a common part of their day-to-day existence. It's very important, I think, to take that origin story of your undead creature into account, because that's going to inform how they act in combat, as well as provide background and context for the place in which they're encountered. Now, for example, this stock skeleton would fit perfectly well into any dungeon, like the Undermountain, for example, possibly the most famous dungeon of them all. But any place you'd expect to find dead adventurers, you might find this skeleton. If, for example, though, you had your party exploring across an ancient battlefield where hundreds of soldiers had died and their skeletons began to rise up, you'd have different kind of skeletons. You'd have, pikeman skeletons, and arbalist skeletons, and knight skeletons in their heavy armor with the tarnished livery engraved into it. And that's just kind of a matter of playing dress up. That's just changing out their equipment, changing out their armaments. It doesn't change the basic nature of the skeleton, but it's going to add more flavor and more richness to the setting that you place them in. What do we have going on here in chat? Yep, spooky skeletons. Okay, so the thing to remember is every skeleton has a narrative behind it. Every skeleton is the story of a life, and when we think about the circumstances of that life, we bring richness and texture to our story and the world that we're creating at the table. So let's think about some creative ways that our skeleton friend over here could have died. What is a common hazard? Again, we're going to go with the stock adventurer model of skeleton. What is a common hazard that an adventurer might fall prey to in a dungeon? Something particular flavor, something ubiquitous yet memorable. Any of you out there have some memorable gelatinous cube stories? I've got a few. So let's say this adventurer fell prey to an ooze monster of some kind. Let's think about how that might affect the remains that they leave behind. And so now instead of just our basic skeleton, we hop back into our studio space. Let's imagine this is an ooze-coated skeleton. This is a skeleton that unfortunately became the lunch of a gelatinous cube, and their remains were just left on the dungeon floor, unattended, waiting for some hapless band of adventurers to arrive and the skeleton to pop up and surprise them. Well, this skeleton has been digested by an ooze. First thing we should do is let's get rid of that armor. We'll say that the ooze ate the armor. So that drops their armor class down by 1, which is going to weaken them a little bit. But that's fine, because I plan to make them a little stronger, and here's how. If you're covered in ooze, oozes have a very acidic nature. So we're gonna assume that digestive process of being consumed by an ooze has imparted certain properties to our ooze-coated skeleton. And so our ooze-coated skeleton is now immune to acid damage. It doesn't hurt. They're already coated in acidic ooze. Your acid spell isn't going to hurt it. We think about this being an ooze-coated skeleton. Everything that they have, all of the weapons that they're carrying, are now dripping with acidic ooze. We need to modify their actions a little bit. So we have a short sword down here. Normally does d6 damage. Let's just add on to that an additional 1d4 acid damage as well. And we'll do the same with their short bow. So now we have a creature that is going to be not only just attacking you with their weapons, but also attacking you with this slime coating that's just clinging to them. And if you get hit with that, it's going to do an additional acid damage as the remnants of this ooze burn away at whatever adventurer they strike. So what we've done is, again, we've kind of balanced it out. We've lowered the armor class, which means it's going to be easier to hit, it's going to be easier to kill, but we've given it a little bit of additional damage to sort of offset that weakness. And what we've wound up with is an interesting enemy that is going to give flavor to the place they show up in. This is a great enemy if you have a dungeon you're designing, or a cavern or an environment that is going to be full of oozes. Oh, thank you, Quizmaster Chris, for the follow. That is fantastic. If you're going to be designing an environment that's full of oozes, sprinkle some of these in along the way. These are the remnants of the previous adventuring party that came down looking for the lost idol of Queen Bopshabop, but never made it back alive. And so now they are down here and doomed to walk the halls of the lost labyrinth of whatever. But this is great because it adds more texture, more flavor to the place, and it also can act as a really great sort of warning to your players if before they encounter all of the oozes, they encounter some of these ooze-coated skeletons, and they twig onto, aha, these people were killed by oozes, maybe we should use those acid resistance potions we have in our bags, or maybe we should cast a resistance spell to make sure that when we run into the oozes, we're not caught unawares. Now, another great thing we can do with skeletons is we can treat them kind of like jigsaw puzzles. If you think about it, all of those bones and the way they connect, the kingdom connects to the... Anyway, all of the ways that they usually connect, we can just pull them apart and recombine them like some kind of Lego-esque construction. So let's think for a moment about ways that we could recombine a skeleton to give it different properties or different abilities. So let me go back to our stock skeleton here. We're going to go back to our standard skeleton. And let's imagine we are putting it together. You're welcome to take that, Logan. Uh, we can take that, we can put it back together in some kind of different way. Let's imagine that we have a skeleton that instead of legs has an extra pair of arms. How does that change our skeleton friend here? Well, we now have a four-armed skeleton. Still going to be medium, still going to be lawful evil. We're not going to change their armor class. We're not going to change any of their statistics. But what we are going to change is we're going to give them a couple of special abilities here. So if we have a four-armed... Whoops, what did I do? A four-armed creature, how does that affect the way it's going to move? What sort of things could you do with an extra set of arms? Well, let's think about primates. Let's think about the way that monkeys move. They kind of have grippable feet, almost like an extra set of hands. That means four legs good, two legs bad? Depends on who you ask. So that means they're going to be able to be a bit more agile. They're going to be able to cling to surfaces that you couldn't do with a set of feet. So let's say that as four-armed skeleton, the skeleton can cling to objects or surfaces and still have two free hands. So it can hang onto a surface and still have two free hands to wield weapons with. It's also imagined because it can basically sort of cartwheel itself, right? There's no upside down for a four-handed skeleton. Let's say that anything that would knock the skeleton prone, it's going to be a lot more difficult now because they can sort of tumble and move in a way that means putting them just flat on their backs is more difficult. So let's give them, what should we call this ability? Let's call this Extreme Tumbling. And we'll say the skeleton has advantage against effects that would knock it prone. So you try to knock the skeleton over, it just sort of tumbles around and winds up back on two of its legs. Doesn't matter if it's the top two or the bottom two, and it's still able to fight. Kind of cool, right? Now we have a four-armed skeleton. Now, we've added quite a bit of strength to this monster. We've made it harder to knock over. We haven't really increased its damage in battle, though. We've given it a little bit more... some interesting new ways to move. I don't think that really justifies upping its challenge rating, though. We've given it some, I think, flavorful changes, but nothing that's going to make it substantially harder for a party to encounter. So we're going to leave that challenge rating where it is at 1/4. And now we have this interesting, unique type of skeleton, and I can just imagine them climbing along the ceiling of a cave, clinging to the stalactites, you know, just hiding up there and then swinging down to attack the party. That'd be great. That'd be a great jump scare. Let's see. Logan is saying advantage on grapple. Ooh, I like that. That's a good idea. Dark Souls flashback. That is ever my goal, is to give people Dark Souls flashbacks with my creations, so thank you. Advantage on grapple. That's an interesting idea. You know what? We'll do that. We'll add an ability or an attribute here. We'll call it handsy. How skeleton's handsy. So it has no. Let's say it has that other creatures. No. Giving other creatures disadvantage, I think, is stronger than giving it advantage. We'll say it has advantage on dexterity, just on advantage to grapple the creature of its size or smaller. So, we now have a four-armed, handsy skeleton that practices extreme tumbling. That sounds like fun. So, let's see. We are quickly running down the hour. So I think let's go to our next segment, which is the open studio. Now, in the open studio segment, this is where I get suggestions from you guys, my lovely chat room, and we use those to build a fantabulous? It's a word now. Fantabulous creation. So we're going to be creating a low-level enemy. Let's start out kind of broadly. What should be our creature's type? Go ahead and make suggestions in chat for what type of creature we should create. It can be a dragonkin. It could be an abomination. Abomination? I don't think that's a technical thing. An aberration, a monstrosity, any type of creature. What do you think? Seeing griffin, which is a type of monstrosity. We're seeing fey. Those are both good suggestions. A fey griffin, which I think is a name. There's probably somebody named Fey Griffin who might be watching. If so, hello, Fey Griffin. All right, so let's. A Fey Griffin. That's an interesting concept. Now, Griffins tend to be a little bit tougher if we're looking at their monster manual statistics. See, a Griffin in the monster manual is challenge rating 2. So that's still relatively low level, but let's imagine we're going to scale it back a little bit further. Yes, Fey Griffin, private investigator. I like that. Let's imagine this is a Griffin hatchling. This is just a tiny little baby Griffin, and perhaps their nest is in the Feywild, so we get that Fey connection there as well. So let's see here. If we're going to make this a, how do you spell Griffin? We're going to make this a Griffin hatchling. And so this is going to be a small monstrosity. Neutral. an alignment. Base armor class, going from the Griffin of the Monster Manuals, base armor class of 12, speed of 30 feet, flying speed. You know what? As being a baby Griffin, we'll say that they don't have flight speed. They haven't quite stretched those wings just yet. Something McElroy joke. Yes, thank you. Now, let's see here. If we're wanting to keep this relatively low level, a baby Griffin isn't going to be particularly strong. It's going to be kind of dexterous. It's going to be more quick than anything. Constitution, let's probably drop that down to, say, an 11. So that's going to drop that to a 0. And we'll bump up their wisdom. So, and baseline Griffin intelligence, charisma. I'm actually going to bump up the charisma of the Griffin hatchling because it's so cute. So a Griffin hatchling is slightly more charismatic than an adult Griffin. And let's see here. We're not going to have any vulnerabilities or immunities of anything kind of like that. But we do still have the dark vision. Passive perception is going to be 11. It's not going to have any languages because it is a Griffin. And we want to keep the challenge rating at about 1/8 to 1/4 if we can. So let's talk about its actions. Well, being a Griffin, it's got a beak, and it's got, claws. So beak is going to be, uh-oh, not sure what I just did. Someday I will learn to spell melee. So melee weapon attack. It's going to be based on its dexterity, so that'll be a +4 to hit. And again, my formatting went wonky. Come on, Google Docs. With a reach of 5 feet, 1 target. This is all very basic melee attack statistics. And we'll say that on a hit, it does, let's see, a normal beak attack does 1d8 damage. Because it is a small monster, we'll increment that down to a 1d6. +2 for their dexterity. So that's going to be an average of 5 piercing damage. And then we have the claws as well. These are going to be pretty much the same. Difference being the claws on an adult do 2d6. Again, because we are incrementing down the size, we're going to change that to... we'll change that from a 2d6 down to a 1d6, so it'll be the same. So the claws and beak, we'll say, do the same amount of damage. Now, are there any special abilities that we think our little Griffin hatchling should have? Especially if it's going to be a, say, a Fey-touched Griffin hatchling. This is a Griffin hatchling that its egg maybe was stolen through a planar portal by some kind of mischievous Fey sprite. And now it has some interesting Fey-like abilities. What do you guys think? What sort of suggestions? Sneeze Fairy Fire. That's a good one. blink depending on a d20 roll. Ooh, that's interesting. Let's say that it has... let's say it has an unreliable blink ability. So the hatchling can attempt to teleport up to 20 feet to a... It can see. Roll 1d6. On a roll of 5 or 6, the teleport is successful. So this little baby has an interesting defensive ability that it's created. It can try to teleport itself a short distance to try and get to safety, but it doesn't always work. And, I'm trying to think about how to work in Logan's suggestion about sneezing fairy fire, which I think is a great idea. It's very cute. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to do this because I think it would be absolutely fun. If you don't feel like this is necessarily balanced for your table, don't feel obliged to include it. But I'm gonna say that when the hatchling takes damage, roll 1d20. On a roll of 20, a wild magic surge occurs. So anything that attacks this little adorable baby griffin, anytime it gets hurt, there's a chance that a wild magic surge happens and some kind of unpredictable magical phenomenon just happens as a result of this tiny, adorable, cute little thing being hurt. So I like that. I like that a lot. And if I was running a game that had the Feywild in it, I would definitely put this creature in it. So if there are any of you out there who are thinking about designing or running a Feywild campaign or are taking your characters in an existing game to the Feywild, there you go. There's something fun for you. Now, we are almost out of time for tonight's stream, so I'm going to wrap it up quickly. I am going to mention that all of the creations that we have on tonight's stream are going to be put up on this stream's World Anvil page. For those of you who don't know, worldanvil.com is a fantastic resource website for creating your own homebrew worlds and homebrew content, whether you're designing an RPG setting, writing a fantasy novel, or anything like that. World Anvil is a fantastic resource for storing all of your information, your characters, your settings, your places, your monsters, your creatures, all of that in a sort of wiki-style setup. They are a sponsor of NerdSmith Network. They are a sponsor of this show, and we do appreciate them greatly for everything they do. Check them out at worldanvil.com. You can create a free account, and if you want some more of the premium features that they're rolling out, which are really kind of interesting, there are paid subscriptions as well. But definitely go check them out. And as I said, everything that we created on the stream is going to be put up over there in our homebrew world, which is called Homebrewia Studiopolis. And let me see. Let me post a link very quickly to that in chat. I probably won't be able to post this. I will send it to Logan and have Logan post it then, because I don't think I have administrator permission. So I've just put that in the Discord. Logan, if you wouldn't mind copying that into chat. There's a link for Homebrewia Studiopolis on World Anvil. Check that out for all of the things that we are creating on tonight's stream and all of our future streams as well. It is now 8 o'clock, which means it is time for me to wrap up things. Thank you so much to those of you who came for our inaugural premiere, very first stream. I said it 3 times again. And we hope you come back every Wednesday night at 5 p.m. on this exact channel, twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have as well. And I think that is going to be it. So, good night, and thanks, everybody.